I had the pleasure of introducing Amy this morning. Amy has been a sister of St. Joseph of Carondelet for over 30 years and has served in a variety of ministries in education and administration and communication. She holds at least 5 degrees, from what I could find out, in science, in communication, and in theology, as well as civil law and canon law. So she's well-rounded in many of these fields. She presently works and has worked in those fields, education and communication, but now acts, I think, primarily as a consultant, working with small to mid-range religious orders, size orders, as well as nonprofits, in helping them look at, strategy in terms of their development. Amy has written 3 books that I'm aware of. One is called Navigating Change, so it's an interdisciplinary examination of the phenomenon of religious communities that need to close, for whom their life cycle has ended. There's another book, and I think Mary has it out at the desk, that might be of interest to many of you, The Screening and Discernment Instrument for Religious Life. Some of you I know have used that discernment tool. It's quite adaptable in terms of the Canadian context, but it's been a worthwhile book for a number of people. The book that I would like to speak on, or at least share some of my excitement about, is Amy's book called Religious Life at the Crossroads. Mm-hmm. So who's read the book? Just anybody? Wow. Okay, good number of people.
So good morning. Good morning. It's my first time in Winnipeg. I'm enjoying it. I'm told this is the real plains. I don't live in the plains, well, which is really true. I'm in St. Louis, which is a little kind of lower Midwest. But it's good to be here. I've been to, so far, this is my 3rd trip to Canada. I've been to Toronto. I've been to Montreal. I'm here today, and I'm going to be in BC next month. So I'm getting my little Canadian experience. You may have heard the phrase, from your lips to God's ears. People say that. I'd like to flip that around and say, from God's lips to your ears. You're all here because you're involved in some way in vocation and formation ministry. And I'm sure that you need to hear certain things, and that God would like to speak to your heart. So I'm hoping that through my words, you can hear what God needs you to hear, what you need to hear for yourselves and for your ministry. So I'd ask you to join me in that prayer, in that context. Today's presentation is going to be a little bit more contextual, and then tomorrow I'm going to weave things together. So I'm going to share some stories, some of my background, some context, some things I've heard along the way that really shape my thinking on vocation, on formation, and on the future of religious life in general. So first of all, I'm a sister of St. Joseph of Carondelet. I entered religious life in '78. I actually did not enter the Sisters of St. Joseph. I entered another community and then transferred. So I got that experience of formation in on the receiving end, in a couple of different communities. I entered just after college. I've lived in dozens of local communities across the U.S. I've served in a variety of ministries. I've spent time on 4 continents, praying, working, living, studying. And I've had to function in a few languages other than English. For ministry, this is my website, I do civil and canon law for religious communities. My academic background really is interdisciplinary. I come from I had a few false starts, if you can say. So theology, history, and sociology, as well as law. I think the social psychology, or the way people interact, has always fascinated me. So as you think of law is really how do communities organize themselves? How do communities set up systems of law to enshrine their values so that their values are lived out? As societies live their lives over time, we get to history. How does the life of a community evolve? How does the life of a society evolve? And when we were talking about religious communities, a community is greater than the sum of its sociological parts. There's a theological element to who we are as communities. And so all of those play off each other as I'm working with communities. My work brings me to various congregations, primarily in the US, but also up here in Canada and some other places, congregations, monasteries, provinces. I'm privileged to gather with the community or with leadership, with the formation group, as they face the challenges of religious life today. How do we welcome new members in a responsible way? How do we address the various concerns that they bring? Family, finance, health, immigration, education, and their professional life. How do we meet the needs of our aging brothers and sisters? How do we ensure the future of our ministries? And how do we envision the future of our congregation or its eventual completion? It's a privilege to be invited to share these moments with communities, to walk with them, to face some incredible challenges. I can say it's holy ground when I come to a community and they have to go back to the fundamental core values of who they are as individuals and as a community as they address the different challenges that they face. And I learn from them. I learn a lot, and what I learn from one community I can then share. That's part of the experience I bring to other communities. I also spend time with younger religious in various formation programs to share my expertise, but also to hear their stories, to hear how they come to religious life with fresh eyes, the questions they ask. Really helps me to see religious life. You know, I'm so inside the life. It helps me to see with fresh eyes. I'm also part of Sisters 2.0, which is an international intercongregational forum for religious women born after 1955. This is where we can share our insights, our experiences. On our last call, which was actually, we do quarterly phone calls where we gather people from all over the world, primarily US, Canada, but we have a New Zealander who's very faithful to our gatherings. She called us tweeners. Like, we're not the youngest folks in religious life, but we're not yet the oldest folks either. And I always say I will probably be one of the youngest sisters in my community until I'm about 90. So what's that experience like, and how can we share and support each other? So a lot of what I know, what I learn, really comes from sharing different ideas on some of these phone calls. And we also have a Facebook page, of course. Giving Voice is another forum for women religious, that's women religious under the age of 50. Many of those of us who founded that group have now aged out of that group, and so that's where Sisters 2.0 comes from. We're basically, from the generational point of view, we're Gen X and millennials. We talk about, our last call, we talked about contemplative dialogue and what is it like for somebody in the very much minority cohort to engage in contemplative dialogue when my entire context and perspective, not my entire context and perspective, but it's, in a sense, I come from a different culture. And so how do I engage and speak my truth in this reality? And also, as we invite younger men and women into communities, they really take to this like fish to water. And yet, when we then engage them in decisions around their vocation, can we use a contemplative dialogue perspective, or is it more, we're going to make a decision about you? So each of these groups provides peer support for women religious who may have few or no peers in their congregation or in their local community. We're looking to build the kind of networks that will support us as we move into the heart of the 21st century. St. Louis, we actually have a group that gathers on ground. We do have face-to-face meetings. We gather on ground for more or less monthly, every other month, an evening of prayer. We share a meal together and some recreation, that type of thing. I'm also living in an eco-village. I actually live with Mako, and we have our house in this eco-village. And so this is a secular community of people in an urban neighborhood who are interested in building community and in building sustainability. So again, this is another form of community that informs my thinking that I want to share with you today. So this is my context, and I would like to share from that perspective. And today's session, like I said, is going to be a little more disjointed. I'm going to give you ideas, stories, things I've heard, places I've been, conversations I've had, cool things I've seen. Think of it like you're scrolling through my Facebook feed, all the things that you might see there. Tomorrow, I'm going to try to weave all this together and give you something a little more coherent. But I thought it was important to share the context because I come from down south, and I'm a woman religious from the U.S., and so my context is somewhat different, and I'm in my 50s. Okay, so we don't know where we're going. Have you heard that before, speaking of religious life? We don't know where we're going? Okay, I hear it a lot. And I acknowledge we are at a crossroads. That's the title of my book. We are at a crossroads. We know that what we've come out of is not sustainable. Okay? What is passing away. And in a certain sense, we don't know where we're going. So we've got a lot of questions. Here in North America, we've experienced about 100, 200 years of growth, unprecedented growth in religious life, followed by 50 years of steady decline, speaking in terms of numbers. This is information on women religious from the U.S. Now, I'll have to tell you, they didn't keep a really close track of the nuns in the U.S. in the early days. So the numbers are the best we can do, and I've gathered them from several different sources. So in 1800, just a handful of women religious. It grew up. By 1900, we were about 50,000, and then the first half of the 20th century is when there was just that increasing growth, similar many of our communities have experienced, peaking out around the middle of the 1960s, and then after that, years of decline. So to where we get 2050, if we project this out, will be likely where we were back in 1800. Meanwhile, the US population and the Catholic population has continued to grow. So whereas in the mid-60s, religious were very visible, not only because of what they wore, but because of the sheer numbers. as we move forward, the invisibility is not simply in what we wear, but in the numbers. How many of our young people have met a religious? When they start to think about religious life, who do they know that's a religious that they can talk to? That's why they go on the internet to find this. Okay, so this notion of we don't know where we're going, there's a truth to that, but I would suggest that perhaps we need a little bit of a marketing makeover if we're going to bring people in. Come on in, we have no idea where we're headed. I think we're asking for risk takers. Folks who are joining us today have probably more realistic, this is my experience, they're more realistic about where we are. They walk into a room of my sisters and look around and they're like, okay, these folks aren't going to be around for long, so how do I join this group? Had an interesting experience recently. We had a come and see, and I've, like many in my generation, spent much of my life in vocation community or formation communities. And so I overheard one of the women talking to one of our sisters she was probably in her 20s at the time, and saying, they're all so old. And what I realized was they weren't talking about the 70 and 80-year-olds because they hadn't met them. They were talking about me. So I think they have a good sense of where we are. We're looking for those who can look at the situation realistically and realize things are changing. There's something new that's going to emerge, and I feel drawn to being part of that new emergence. People see this reality back here as an opportunity to tap into that tradition and bring it forward in a new way, to reinvent religious life for a new age and for a new church. Like I said, I work with lots of communities in various capacities. Oftentimes their median age is around 80, late 70s, early 80s. And they invite me to walk with them around a particular issue that they're dealing with as a community. Talk about their options, the possibilities, and what the consequences of possible choices might be. So take a community, community of 23, average age of 80. And they're struggling to find leadership and to make some choices. And they're introducing me to each of the people around the table. And they say, meet our vocation director. And I've learned not to let my jaw drop. And I begin to engage them around what's going on here. How do you promote vocations? Who would form them if they came? And what communities are ready to welcome them and to nurture their vocations? I think there does come a time when a community needs to look inside itself and seriously ask if it's time to, at least for now, not accept vocations. Now, I do know that there are stories in history of, a few old sisters, a few old guys kicking around a monastery, and all of a sudden, well, St. Bernard is one. He shows up with 20 of his buddies, and okay, yeah, that's great. And if that happens, you deal with it. But is it a time to be out meeting new people and inviting them? I also have been introduced to some of the folks in formation. So meet our novice. So we have Melissa, a 28-year-old journalist, works for a Spanish language Catholic magazine. Maybe she's joining that community of 23, none of whom are Hispanic. How does she find a place in the community, and how does the community find a place for her in their hearts and in their homes. Who are the formators? Where are the communities where they can live? One sister told me, this is a woman in formation, told me that she had moved into a community, she was probably in her 40s, into a community with a couple of sisters who were in their 70s and 80s. They'd lived together for decades. She was unpacking her things and moving into their guest room. And she took her coffee cup and pulled it out of the box and walked into the kitchen. A couple of the sisters were in there just putzing around, and said, where can I put my coffee cup? And one of the sisters opened the cupboard, and there were all the coffee cups were jammed in there, and she said, maybe you can keep it in your room, we've got too many in here. Okay, there's something about welcoming people and really making them fully a part of our group. I've also heard of communities where somebody new moves in and they've been there for quite some time. They'll pull everything out of their rooms and we'll all choose new moves. We make like symbolic movements that help us to realize this is a new community and we all need to be very intentional about welcoming somebody. There's also the issue of support. Can we support this person in relationships of mutuality? They're not, like me, a new sister for 20, 30 years. They become fully members of our communities. They're not coming to stay in our guest rooms. They're coming to help write a common story with us. We promise to give them mutual support for life. I was recently at a final profession, and as the group welcomed this sister into their community for life, I was looking around and wondering who's going to be around for her 50th anniversary. So it's a challenge. Obviously, hopefully, we're going to continue to invite people, but it's a very different world that we're inviting to. One congregation told me the story. Several sisters, all under the age of 60, were forming community together. The community had an age range of 25 years. So the youngest were in their 20s, the oldest were in their 50s. It was actually the widest age range of any community in their congregation. Most of the communities were, 5 to 10 year age range. And they said it raised a few eyebrows when they asked, where are your wisdom figures? Okay, all of these sisters had graduate degrees. They all had positions of responsibility in their ministry. Collectively, they had over 50 years of religious life experience. They have their wisdom figures. Okay? They invited some older sisters to join them to really make it a broader generational span. None of them accepted the invitation, but they did tell me about one conversation that they had had with one of the sisters. This is a sister who had done vocation formation ministry for much of her life, was very supportive of the younger sisters. And she said, I'm honored by the invitation, she said, but how can I live with all these younger sisters? I have nothing in common with you. And then she reflected, she said, I realize we're asking you to come and live one by one with sisters a generation or two older than you. And I realize what that experience must feel like for you. So I thought it was a good experience. It was a good example of somebody seeing from the other side. One millennial living with several in their 70s and 80s isn't really an intergenerational community. It oftentimes is a monogenerational community with a transplant from another planet, if you will. I have actually worked with communities where they are truly intergenerational. So Pat Whitberg uses the terms the millennials, the post-Vatican generation, that's me, the Vatican II generation, those who came of age around Vatican II, and the pre-Vatican, those who came of age prior to Vatican II. And I've seen communities where there's a good representative from each of those generations, and it really is an enriching experience because each of those generations brings something to the table. They bring their own wisdom, they bring their own energy, their own experience, and when you can blend all of those, you can really have a dynamic community. And I think one of the things religious life can do is really offer the wisdom of the various stages of religious life and offer that true multicultural conversation about life as a school of religious life. Having new people come in and shake us up can be a really powerful experience. I was recently asked to write an article. This is by NRBC. I think it's coming out soon. They asked me to write an article, and I was talking to Carol Schreiber, who's their editor, and the question as she originally formulated it was like, is it fair, is it unfair, is it unjust to be inviting people into our communities at this point when we're asking, or when we're saying we don't know where we're going? How do you do vocation ministry on the precipice of the collapse, as she called it? And it's been called in the U.S. So we're at a place where, in the last 10 years for most communities of women in the U.S., and this is really my main context, in the last 10 years, the largest cohort of, the largest groups of women have moved from active ministry into what I call active retirement. So they may actually still be working in an active ministry. They may be very actively volunteering. So they're still active, but they're not on the forefront. In the next 10 years, we're looking for that last large group to move from active retirement into more senior retirement. So we're at a particular place in religious life, and we're asking what does it look like to invite people in at this particular place, on a precipice. I think it's time. It was a good opportunity for me to really reflect on this question. I do believe people are sensing that call from God. They are feeling that deeply. You can see it in their eyes when they talk about it. I do believe religious life has a future, but I do not believe it's business as usual. There is going to be a shift, and how do we navigate that shift? This is not, smooth sailing. This is not Winnipeg terrain here. It's going to be challenging terrain, and how do we navigate that? As we move forward, we can't reinvent the past. I do hear people say, if only we had those hundreds or thousands. My community my province was over 1,000 at its high point. We're not going to, I don't think, we're going to see those huge numbers as we saw that 200-year timeline. It's unlikely that we may, but I don't think we're heading in that direction in the near future. But I do think these smaller groups of younger women religious men and women religious, have an energy and a vitality and a vision to take what they receive and to bring it forward. This is the traditio, tradition in the original sense. I always think that the greatest example of traditio, handing on, is Jesus at the Ascension. So he handed everything over to these motley group of disciples who had done some good things, but also hadn't shown up very well in the end of his own life. And yet he handed everything over to them and went home. And trusted them to carry it forward. That's the kind of trust we need to have as we hand over both our ministries and our communities. So many of our own sisters, our own brothers, when they founded our communities or brought them over from Europe, they came in small groups and they did what they needed to do. Coming from Europe to America, to North America, when from North America we sent people out to Latin America, to Asia, to Africa. When we dreamed new ministries and had the courage to make that dream into a reality on the ground. I think we're invited to take religious life into the heart of the 21st century with fewer numbers and with immense challenges. And like in the past, it's not going to be the whole group that's going to be marching forward. It's going to be that group that's sent out. In my community, I think of the boat, the ship that they came over on. 6 sisters in their 20s, not knowing, they French-speaking, came to St. Louis, not knowing anything, and they made it happen. So it's that those outposts of the new emerging forms with the support of the wider community. It's that sending out, but also staying in contact. We're inviting co-creators, folks who can help us build that next thing. In the Second Vatican Council, we reimagined what the church looks like. We're still reimagining what religious life looks like in this new church. So Traditio is that handing on, that giving over of our charism, of our community, of all that we have, all that we hold dear in our congregations. Communio, I'm going to use it slightly different than Scott did, is that staying together, communion with one another, staying in relationship. And then missio, going out to meet today's needs, today's challenges. Our communities, I think, often were built with an infrastructure for my own province for hundreds or thousands. I look at us as maybe being a province of a dozen or so. Our infrastructure will be different. Our relationships will be different. We'll collaborate more. We'll give our energies to projects that may be run by somebody else, or we'll collaborate with others. It's going to be a different world from when we set up the hospital, which was great. I mean, it was what was needed at the time. We set up the hospital, we staffed it, we ran it. Amazing work. Sometimes when I work with a community and they're explaining their demographics, often that's part of the conversation. Who do we have and how old are they? They'll tell me, we have so many in their 80s, 90s, 70s, 60s, etc. And then they'll say, well, actually nobody has entered and stayed for 10, 15, 20 years or more. And I know I'm always a little uncomfortable with that language. I think it might be more helpful if we flipped it around and say that we have been unable to attract and retain anyone for this period of time. If they didn't come and they didn't stay, that's those Gen Xers and those millennials, those folks out there, it's their problem. They didn't show up, or they showed up and they didn't stay. It's because they couldn't find a place to put their coffee cup. Then there's nothing we can do about it. But if we say we've been unable to attract and we've been unable to retain new members, then we're taking responsibility for the situation. We can ask ourselves why. What can we do? We can engage this with openness and with a willingness to be changed. Now, this may not be the road for our community. I think some communities have come to the decision. I had actually one Carmelite in her 80s as they were closing down their community, that group, and they're smaller monasteries. But there were 4 sisters left. They all moved in with another Carmelite community. And I love this gal, Sister Mary of the Angels. And she said to me, she said, we've done our mission on earth. She was there when the community was opened, and she was there when the community closed. And she wrote this beautiful letter about that's where we are. And for some communities, that is where they are. And that's, so part of it is discerning where is God calling our particular community. In my experience, sometimes it's not the whole community that can get around this attracting and retaining people. We can't, well, we could maybe change the whole community, renew the whole community. And it would be a blessing, certainly. But in my experience, there are pockets of energy, there are pockets of passion around inviting younger men and women. And if we can catalyze those groups, I think that's the best use of our energies. Some are ready. Let's gather those sisters. Let's gather those brothers, those who have the energy for this, and let's set out on the path of genuine transformation. I believe transformation is the work of the few. It's not the work of the many. We never sent the entire congregation from France to St. Louis. It wouldn't have worked. We sent that little boat with the 6 sisters. Those who had the energy for it. And if you look at the history of religious life, communities are founded by a handful. They're refounded. They're renewed by a handful. And that's who we're looking for. A study came out in the U.S. last year, a report came out, and according to that, there were 250,000 women, millennials, who had seriously considered religious life. 250,000, okay? Now, less than 1% of those people actually entered communities, if you just count the people who actually entered. So I'm like, wow, am I part of an exclusive group? And I have to ask, where are these women? And where are we? Where are our communities? And for the men, I don't know what the numbers are, but where are our communities? Can we get out into those spaces where these men and women are? And just as a little hint, my guess is they're probably not hanging out in our comfort zones. I actually had lunch recently with a Buddhist woman, a young woman, mutual friend, got us in contact. Her parents were both ministers. She had kind of moved away out of the Christian tradition and had kind of tried out different faith traditions. But she was always very interested in the spiritual life. She was fascinated by religious life. And she asked me, like, who do you invite? Who do you recruit? And I looked at her and I'm like, somebody that looks like you. She's socially conscious, deeply spiritual, desires to live in community and to make a difference in the world. I'm like, perfect. So I think there are these young folks out there. They may not be, like I say, we have the Young Nun group, talks about the group watching Wheel of Fortune. It's a game show in the U.S. I don't know if that's big up here. Okay. We call it the Holy Hour. That may not be where they are, but they may be at soup kitchens. They may be out at volunteer. I certainly meet a lot of them in the intentional community movement. They're looking for spiritually meaningful lives. They're looking for community. They're looking to commit themselves to something bigger than they are. I mean, does that sound like somebody you'd like to talk to? So I think these folks are there. It's a matter of making the connection with them. I recently read an article about a high school teacher. He spent time during his summers in a monastery. It was just something he did, go for a week or so. He'd live with the brothers, join with them as they got up to pray very early in the morning. Ate with them, went out to do the various jobs around the monastery. For him, it was a time of enrichment and a time of renewal. And when he got back to the classroom in the fall, to his theology classes, he would always tell the students the story of where I spent my summer vacation. And he found the students to be fascinated by this. The fact that there still are places like this on the globe today. They were full of questions. And as he explained his experience and shared his experience, he said there's something about that experience. It's real, it's authentic. In our world of it's fast-paced, Snapchat for something only stays up for a short period of time. This is something grounded. This is something real. And it does have that attraction for some of the people. So the brothers touched his life, and then he then brings that experience out and touches others' lives with it. I think some of our best advertisements are our communities. How many of us were drawn by brothers and sisters that seemed full of life, full of commitment, full of joy? That's what brought us, and I think that's what will bring others to our communities. In my own province, the immediate previous vocation director, I think, really tapped into this, because one of her big drives while she was vocation director was turning into the community and inviting people to form vibrant communities. In many communities, particularly of women in the U.S., we'll have this phenomenon where 5, 6, 7, 8 sisters moved into a house, and then one sister moves on, and another sister moves on, and one moves to the retirement community, and one dies, and we get down to ones and twos. So we end up with a lot of ones and twos. So she was inviting people to really be very intentional about building communities that were engaged, living attentively and intentionally, eager to welcome someone new, and growing in the values that bring us together. So now, building on her work, we have a number of communities. We have 5 or 6 communities in the St. Louis area that we could invite people to, that we can invite them to share a meal with, to spend some time with, as they engage in that vocation discernment. I think that was a crucial piece that she brought to us, and it was a lot of work on her part. Nobody actually entered during her tenure, but there's a lot of people on the verge right now, and we've got places to invite them. So it's critical. Our new vocation formation team, through an interesting series of events, we've revamped vocation and formation. So we have a team, and we think of ourselves as having the vocation side having 4 basic tasks: reaching out of our comfort zone, if you will, reaching out to find people who may be interested in our community, inviting them in, and having places and times when we can invite them in, and gathering the sisters, in my case, who are interested and have the energy to welcome women who may be looking at our community. Networking, and actually I expanded my network these days because of connecting with you, but we network across the congregation, across our federation in the U.S., and actually Canada as well. Also, the NRVC, the RFC, the different networks, our regional networks for this ministry. And then communicate, get the word out. We're actually blessed. We have a team of 6. All of us have other full-time ministries, but there's a bunch of writers on the team. And so we can get out on social media, but also communicate within the province, let people know what we're doing, invite people in if they want to participate in different things we're doing. So the 3 layers, core team is all sisters under the age of 60, which is, that was a little bit of a stretch for my community, because it had been mainly the older sisters who had been engaging in this work. Surrounding that group, we have a group of sisters who've done vocation formation ministry and who want to participate, but they just don't want the full responsibility of it. So actually, at the end of this week, we're going to get together with them and share about what we've done so far and how they can get involved with us. And then the support team is everybody. We say it's everybody else in the community, but it's everybody else who'd like to be involved in some way, either participating or hearing about what we're about. Okay, so let me tell you a little more about the Eco Village. So I live in Dogtown Eco Village. This is a neighborhood. It's a group of people who've come together, a group of families or households who've come together to live more sustainably. We live in geographic proximity. We can more or less walk to each other's houses. We've got a few kind of satellite people, but most of us, we can walk to each other's houses. We share an interest in building community together through social events, shared activities, being what I perceive the old neighborhoods used to be. Building sustainability through ecological projects, gardening, energy efficiency, and then also building relationships with our wider neighborhood and with the region on these particular issues that are of most concern for us. This is actually not a picture of our neighborhood, but it's kind of like what it might look like someday. With people, this is our house. We actually recently had to move our house and just a couple of blocks within the same eco-village, and folks from the eco-village gathered to help us move our plants. That's important. We had some of our friends as well, but we had a couple of work days. Just anybody come, bring your shovel, bring your water bottle, and we're off and running. So it's a lot of values, sustainability, environment, building a society where we can collaborate and help one another out. And I learn a lot by moving in among these various circles. So my sister community and my eco-village community and my sister 2.0 community. The average age in the eco-village is significantly younger than the average age in my sisters. And yet I think there's some commonalities in the way we go about living community. I've learned, in fact, I just gave a little presentation to an eco-village network in St. Louis. So we have a number of these groups. And I want to do a little thought experiment with you. So I think communities have a lifestyle. They definitely have a lifestyle. They have a life cycle. Okay, so a community is not the same in its first year, its 50th year, its 150th year. So think about a community that's been together for 1 month. Okay, a community you've lived in, a community that you know, religious community, or it could be some other intentional community. And jot down just a word or a name or an image for that community. So grab a hold of that notion. Community that's been together for about a month. And then think of a community that's been together for about a year. Again, it could be a religious community, an intentional community, one you know, one you've lived in. And what's your name for that? Name or image? And then imagine a community that's been together for a decade. Religious community, intentional community. And again, just a word or an image. Now, if you're like me, there's a bit of a different feel to each of those communities. I'm getting the sense I'm getting some resonance. I'd like to explore that just a little bit. You've heard the forming, storming, etc. Maybe some of you. Okay, so basically when a community first comes together, we call about their forming, okay? In the intentional community world, there's a website, a Fellowship for Intentional Communities. You can post your community if you want to get people in. And forming is one of the standard things. We're forming. So oftentimes this is a time of being nice, getting along, trying to be a good little community member, and not hit anybody, rub anybody's shoulder the wrong way. That's your 1 month community. It can be a very powerful experience when you form community for a short period of time. The community that we form here for a brief period of time. Very powerful experience. Okay? As you move on, you start to get on each other's nerves. Yeah. So the newness and the niceness wears off. And come on, we all know how to fold a kitchen towel, don't we? When I brought the spice rack, how do we organize the spice rack? The big ones, the little ones? Alphabetical. New, old. How much do we get? Do we get a small container so we always have it fresh? Do we get a big container because it's cheaper? And lower environmental impact. So they're not right or wrong, they're just different ways of doing it. But if it's not my way, we've got to talk. Okay, so then we move into this norming phase. We have if we're going to be a community that's going to stay together, we have the conversations about what works for me and what works for you, and how do we live together in a way that's peaceful and sane. How do we navigate our legitimate differences and expectations? Okay. And then I'm going to make up a term, because it doesn't usually come into this language. It's what I call long-terming. It doesn't quite rhyme, but it's close. A group that's been together for more than 5 years loses the social capacity to welcome new members. Okay? We've been through the forming, we've been through the storming, we've been through the norming, we've had the discussion about the spice rack. We're not going there again. This is where the spices belong, okay? It becomes difficult to welcome new members. Newcomers end up being those guests, not full members. There are too many unwritten rules about how we live together. So we don't want to have the discussion about arranging the cookbooks once again, and then we find out our new brothers and sisters have their cookbook on their iPad. So the newcomers just have to fit their lives around the rest of us. This is the time we pray. If you're out at ministry, well, figure it out. But not being, it gets more difficult for us to adjust around that new person. Now, you could say that, this is what I had to deal with when I entered. I came in and they told me when I prayed, and they told me how the spice rack was arranged and all. And to a certain extent, that's true. But I think the majority of folks in religious life today, and I could say this is true of me in my first community, we came in hordes. So we basically overwhelmed the system, so we got to make the rules. Or not that we got to make the rules, but there was an adjustment as we came, because there had to be, okay? That's not so much the case when we have, a majority of veteran members and just one or two comes every once in a while. There's this sociological capacity. What happens if you can navigate this as this performing, the community's got some new life, it adjusts, and so it makes it a new community. Okay? In the intentional community movement, they'll talk about communities usually only last for 3 to 5 years. If you can get beyond that point, we've got a couple in St. Louis that have made it beyond the 5-year point. And that's a big deal, because for these intentional communities, somebody will get married, somebody gets a job, somebody goes for education, and they can no longer take part in the community. So those communities usually don't have a long period, so that's that adjourning piece. Okay, I think this is helpful, not only thinking of people moving into our local communities, but for people moving into our congregations, into our provinces. Are we able to welcome them, to adjust to, not the Wheel of Fortune holy hour, but maybe folks want to go out and play volleyball. How many of us are up to go play volleyball tonight? And how do we afford? Okay, we got some volunteers. How do we afford each other the space that we need to be our generation? I'm not 80, so how do I find my place in the group? And also, the folks who come in and shake us up do give us that opportunity for renewal. I want to talk a little bit about formation. Formation, I'm going to say, is taking somebody off the street, somebody who's not a member of the community, and somehow bringing them into full membership in the community. For the most part, the folks that are coming today are older and more diverse than the folks who entered 50 years ago. They come more mature, with more life experience, with more formation. And so, how do they come to be members of the community? What are we inviting them into? I think that the pre-novitiate phase, canonically there's nothing in canon law before the novitiate, so that's all what the community is arranging. So this is an invitation up to novitiate, is basically preparing people for novitiate. Nobody can come into the novitiate, canon law says, unless they are suitably prepared. And that's going to mean different things for different people. How do we help the person get ready to say, yes, I want to do novitiate. I would like to take that Sabbath time to prepare myself for vowed life in your community. And then we as a community need to get to know this person. We need to be able to get ready to welcome them and say, yes, I believe that you show promise to potentially be a vowed member of our community, and we're willing to commit the time to bring you through the novitiate process. So that's a lot of discernment. I get involved in the screening side of the legal financial part of the screening, settling finances, professional life, immigration, education. Live-in is often part of that experience. And then the novitiate is that special Sabbath time. Our formation plans that we have worked out diligently in each of our communities tell us what historically has been seen as being helpful for people coming into the community. But as we have fewer and fewer people, it's also, and more diverse people coming in, I think it's also important to look at the particular candidate. We as a community may look at this candidate and say, we think this or that might be helpful. And also invite the candidate. Again, these folks are generally more mature. They have a sense of what they need. What do you need to feel a part of your community? I was a transfer, and they asked that question. What I needed didn't become part of the plan, but it was certainly the plan I worked. It wasn't written down. What do you need to become a part of the community, to feel yourself a member of the community, and to be prepared for vowed life among us. It's obviously, everything's not up for grabs. We do need to do the prayer, the spirituality, vows, charism, discernment. But I think there's this triple mutuality with our tradition, with the current leadership and formators who are speaking on behalf of the community, and with the candidate. I'm going to throw in one more thing regarding planning, and that's what I call protecting the resume. As we get older folks coming into community, we've gotten better at dealing with immigration and education debt and things like that. One of the things that I'm seeing with people coming out of novitiate is we haven't thought well enough about how does this person go back and get into ministry. Now, if we're not able to provide them, a job opening within one of our ministries, how does that person, particularly if they're in their 40s or 50s, go back into ministry with that gap? Can we think of that as we're making that plan for this particular candidate? Protecting the resume. Protecting their ministry potential, but also if they leave, they're going to need to take up their life where they left off. That was pre-novitiate. Novitiate. Temporary vows. Then is a time of living out the life in a somewhat provisional way. I believe that religious life itself is formative when it's well lived, and that's not just formative for new folks. I think it's also formative for those of us who've been doing it for a while. The vows are formative. Community life, well lived, is formative. Newly professed often have challenged our communities when they come in fresh out of the novitiate with calling us to our ideals. And that can be a good challenge. That can be that renewal that they're bringing their storming and their forming mentality in and shaking us up, helping us to renew our own lives. So it can be, I think, that experience of mutuality and renewal. It's not just a school of discipleship for the newcomers. It's a school for all of us. So how can we take that opportunity to grow in our own lives? And finally, I'd like to leave you with an image. I've thrown out a lot of images today, more stories. And like I say, tomorrow I want to weave this together a little bit more. We don't know what all the tools are going to be, but I believe it's our call to walk into the unknown, to stand on this particular precipice, to let go of where we've been, to let go of what's familiar, even if we don't know what we're grabbing hold of yet. The image that I have for this is the trapeze. Trapeze artist has to let go of one bar, trusting that there will be a bar to grab onto. Can we trust? Can we let go? Thank you.